Welcome to Podcast Summaries, where every week we break down powerful ideas from 8 to 10 top podcasts to help you grow, heal, and thrive while saving time. If you find this summary helpful, please subscribe and check out links for more content. Your support keeps this journey going. Here is a summarized version of Why Does the Female Orgasm Exist? Dr. Robert King, featuring Dr. Robert King by Chris Williamson. Dr. Robert King's journey into studying the female orgasm followed with a book by Elizabeth Lloyd, which claimed that the female orgasm had no function. This sparked his interest, and he shifted studying evolutionary biology, approaching prominent figures in the field and questioning their assumptions. He delved into the original research and found two distinct traditions of studying human sexuality, one of which suggested that the female orgasm had some interesting functions. Dr. King's intuition was that the female orgasm was not just a byproduct of evolution, but rather, it had a specific purpose. He was drawn to the work of the Foxes, a team in England who studied the female orgasm in a more natural setting, rather than in a laboratory. Their research found that the female orgasm was associated with oxytocin action and uterine pressure changes, which provided a mechanism for increasing fertility. Dr. King believes that most people get the female orgasm wrong by assuming it's either a psychological issue or a byproduct of evolution. He argues that the female orgasm is not just a spandrel, but rather it has a specific function. Dr. King explains that the female orgasm is adaptive because it increases oxytocin levels, which creates pressure changes that help move sperm towards the egg. He notes that this is not just about pair bonding, but rather it's a more basic function that's associated with milk production and nurturing instincts. He argues that the primary instinct is bonding with offspring, and that the sex instincts are secondary. Mechanically, the female orgasm creates pressure changes that help move sperm towards the egg. Dr. King's research found that up to an hour after sex, the vagina will eject material from the reproductive tract, and that the amount of material ejected is reduced by 15–20% if the woman has had an orgasm. He notes that the timing of the orgasm is important, and that it's more effective if the fluid is present before the orgasm occurs. However, he acknowledges that it's difficult to measure this in a laboratory setting. Chris Williamson delves into the concept of sperm competition, asking Dr. Robert King if the idea is related to the research on female orgasm. Dr. King explains that the concept of sperm competition is indeed connected, but the research by Baker and Bellis in the 90s was flawed, as it assumed that the female orgasm was the sole cause of sperm competition. However, Dr. King's research suggests that the female orgasm is a more complex phenomenon that cannot be reduced to a single factor. Dr. King then discusses the different categories of female orgasm, which he and his team discovered through a questionnaire that asked women to describe their orgasms. Dr. King stresses that these categories are not mutually exclusive, and that women themselves do not distinguish between them. Chris Williamson asks Dr. King to elaborate on the predictors of female orgasm, and Dr. King reveals that the biggest predictor is an attractive partner's smell, which suggests that genetic compatibility plays a significant role. Other predictors include dominance, considerateness, and deep penetration. Dr. King notes that these predictors are not necessarily the same as those that predict male attraction, and that women's desire for men is often driven by other females' desire for the same men. The conversation then turns to the topic of female-female competition, with Dr. King suggesting that women often compete with each other for the same men, but in a more subtle and deniable way than men. Chris Williamson notes that female competition is often couched in terms of compassion and concern, rather than direct aggression. Dr. King agrees, citing the example of venting, a type of gossip that disguises itself as concern for another person's well-being. The discussion also touches on the idea that female competition is often driven by the desire to secure resources and status, and that women may use subtle forms of status interplay to achieve these goals. Dr. King notes that this type of competition can be damaging, citing the example of high child mortality rates among co-wives in polygamous societies. This conversation stuck with Dr. King, and he began to wonder why women would fake orgasms and what it might signal to their partners. Dr. King explains that the female orgasm is a complex phenomenon that can't be reduced to simple explanations. He notes that women may fake orgasms for various reasons, including boredom, a desire to please their partner, or to signal that they're interested in their partner. However, these explanations don't get to the root of why men are interested in the female orgasm as a signal, or why women would go to the effort of faking it. Dr. King draws a parallel between the female orgasm and laughter, citing research by Athena Actipus that shows laughter can be faked, and that the sound patterns of fake laughter can be detected. He suggests that the female orgasm may be subject to similar dynamics, with women signaling to their partners that they're enjoying themselves, even if they're not. Chris Williamson notes that this insight is reminiscent of the way women use expensive handbags as a signal to other women that their partner is invested in them. Dr. King agrees, saying that the female orgasm can be seen as a form of intersexual competition, where women are signaling to their partners and to other women that they're desirable and attractive. The conversation turns to the topic of dark romance novels and the way they portray dominant male characters. Dr. King notes that these novels often feature BDSM themes and that they're incredibly popular among women. He suggests that these novels tap into a deep-seated desire for dominance and submission, and that they allow women to explore these fantasies in a safe and controlled environment. Chris Williamson shares his own experience as a cover model for dark romance novels, and notes that the genre has evolved over time to include more sanitized and less dominant male characters. However, he suggests that this shift has not been successful, and that women still respond to the more dominant and alpha male characters. Dr. King notes that this phenomenon is not unique to women, and that men also have fantasies that are not necessarily aligned with their real-life desires. He cites the example of men who watch porn featuring women they would not marry, and suggests that this is a common pattern in human behavior. The conversation turns to the topic of aloof and intimate societies, where the sexes have limited interaction and relationships are often transactional. Dr. King notes that these societies often feature dominant male characters, and that women may find these men attractive despite their lack of domestication. Chris Williamson notes that this phenomenon is not limited to sex, and that it can be seen in other areas of life, such as the romanticization of the hopeless thug in movies like The Notebook. Dr. King agrees, saying that this archetype is a common feature of human culture, and that it taps into a deep-seated desire for excitement and passion. The conversation turns to the topic of predictors of female desire, and Dr. King notes that good smell, dominance, and penetrative vigor are all important factors. He explains that humans have the largest penises of any primates, and that this may be due to competition for female pleasure. However, he also notes that this theory is not universally accepted, and that there may be other explanations for the size of the human penis. Chris Williamson wonders if male erections are a fitness signal identifier. Dr. Robert King thinks so, pointing out that indirect evidence suggests this, and women themselves say it's true. He notes that big signalers on our bodies, like breast size, are things we're coy about. But if you ask the opposite sex, they care about them. In fact, women prize girth over length when it comes to male genitalia, which makes sense given the anatomy of the clitoris. Dr. Robert King explains that the girth of the penis produces tension around the glands of the clitoris, which become engorged with blood when a woman is aroused. He notes that women often need to be more aroused than men, and that this arousal is often internal, but attention spent there is unlikely to be wasted. However, women take longer to get to that point than men, which can cause confusion. Chris Williamson asks why some women can orgasm easily, while others need elaborate stimulation, and some can't orgasm at all. Dr. Robert King says the honest answer is that they don't know, but there could be clinical issues, drug interactions, or hormonal interactions at play. He notes that women often have sex when they're not aroused, and this can affect their ability to orgasm. He also mentions that hormonal birth control could be a factor, but there's a gap in the data on this topic. Chris Williamson points out that the conversation around female orgasm often lays the blame at the feet of the man, saying he needs to understand the woman's body better. However, Dr. Robert King thinks that's how sexual selection works, and men are being judged all the time. He notes that women become more orgasmic as they get older, possibly because they know what they like and are more demanding. He also mentions that hormonal birth control could be affecting orgasm rates, and it's a massive experiment that's been done on a huge population without much control. Dr. Robert King explains that the orgasm gap exists because once a man gets erect, he's likely to orgasm through penetrative sex, but women need more than just penetration to orgasm. He notes that women's orgasms are less likely to happen in casual sex, possibly because they're not learning what their partner wants. However, if a woman does orgasm in casual sex, it could be a sign that she's found a good partner. Chris Williamson asks if women who have extramarital affairs are more likely to orgasm with their extramarital partner than their marital partner. Dr. Robert King thinks they might be less likely to orgasm, but if they are more likely, it could be a sign that they're going to mate switch. He notes that female selection is the key driver in all primates, and humans are no exception. He thinks that social media has widened the potential comparative base for female sexual selection, making it harder for women to choose a partner. Chris Williamson wonders if female orgasm rates have gone down due to the increased availability of potential partners. Dr. Robert King doesn't know, but thinks it's an interesting question. He characterizes modern sexual culture as one where female sexual selection is inherently comparative, and social media has made it harder for women to choose a partner. Chris Williamson wonders if men are really as open about their sex lives as women think they are. He shares that guys don't usually sit around and talk about their sex lives in the way that women might imagine. Dr. Robert King agrees, recalling how the Trump locker room talk scandal made him realize that he'd never actually heard that kind of conversation in a locker room. He thinks that guys who boast about their sex lives are often seen as just that, boastful. Dr. King notes that women have a difficult job to do in distinguishing between men who are suitable partners and those who might be exploitative. He thinks that this is why some women might find sexual dominance in the bedroom erotic, but are hesitant to express this openly. This creates a kind of signaling problem, where women need to be careful about how they express their desires in order to avoid attracting the wrong kind of attention. Chris Williamson brings up the topic of birth rate decline, which he thinks is a crucial conversation that's being stifled by political polarization. Dr. King agrees that this is a difficult topic to discuss, but notes that it's essential to separate the issue from its potential to be weaponized politically. The conversation turns to the topic of women's fantasies and desires, with Chris Williamson sharing a statistic about the popularity of violent porn among women. Dr. King notes that this is a complex issue, and that women's fantasies don't always align with their real-life desires or values. He shares some of his own research on spree killers, and the women who fetishize them, which he finds disturbing. Chris Williamson asks Dr. King to square the circle on the issue of female sexual agency, pointing out that women are often seen as passive objects with no agency over their own desire. Dr. King responds that this is a strategy that some women use to manipulate men, but notes that it's not always a conscious choice. He thinks that women's desires and behaviors are complex and multifaceted, and that we need to approach the topic with nuance and understanding. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe, check out YouTube channel, and just remember, subscription is only £1 or $1 per month. Leave a comment or review. Until next time, happy listening.